Welcome back. My name is Carrie Connell, and I'm joined by my colleague, Allison Donaldson. This is the second in our financial fitness bootcamp series for women, and the subject today is creating a long-term vision. Our firm is very passionate about educating our clients in the community to ultimately lead to greater peace of mind when it comes to your financial future. In this 5-week series, we hope to educate, empower, and motivate you to get started on your financial plan. Last week, we started off with some tips to get your financial house in order, including gathering and organizing information about your assets and liabilities, your income and expenses, and we touched about the importance of having an estate plan, being appropriately insured, and protecting your credit. Once you're organized, have the basics in place, you can start looking forward to the future. That's our focus for today, understanding the importance of setting financial goals and how to make a plan to achieve them, and also exploring the impact of today's decisions on tomorrow's goals. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So while Allison is presenting the content, I will be fielding questions through the chat button, which is at the bottom of your screen. And the chat is only going to Allison and myself, so it's totally private. So please ask away, and we'll try to answer them as we go. So Allison, you want to get going?
Great. Thank you, Carrie. And I have to say, I'm really excited for today's topic because our planning process when we work with clients starts with a discussion about goals. And as you get to know a new client, this first conversation gives you real insight into what they value and is probably one of the most important steps that we take in the planning process because we need to know what we're planning for. And I think this quote from a song that George Harrison wrote says it all. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And for me, this conjures up images of someone running around in circles, not making any progress and having no direction. And goals are our destination and tell us which road to take. And I would say a fair amount of time when you start this discussion, a client has very specific goals in mind. Want to retire at age 70, want to pay for college, want to leave a legacy. And other times clients are more vague in what they want to accomplish. And so to help flesh out their goals, one of the questions I love to ask is, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do differently? And they really light up at this, and you start to get down to what makes this person tick. And answers I've gotten have ranged from, I wouldn't do anything differently, to I'd write a book, or I'd volunteer instead of work, I'd sail around the world. And the point is that every one of us is unique and our goals can be too. So imagine in your mind's eye what your future self looks like. What will you be doing in 5, 10, 20 years from now? How do you want to live your life? What do you value most? This upfront work is the opportunity to consider what you want out of life. Setting goals gives you that direction and purpose, and you can start to make a plan to get there. Once you set your goals, you'll be able to identify next steps in your financial plan. Things like, what kinds of accounts should I open, or how much should I contribute? How much do I have to contribute to reach those goals? It also informs an appropriate asset allocation for your investments. And when you're making choices to fulfill a goal, you feel empowered and more in control of your financial future, and ultimately a greater peace of mind. And that's an incredibly liberating feeling. So rather than taking any road, you're taking a directed road. As you think through your goals, even if they seem like abstract or far off, it can be important to take the time to name them and gather as many details as you can. And your family values will definitely contribute where you want to spend your resources and what goals you set. So for example, if you value the best possible higher education for your children, you'll be planning to pay for significant college expenses. If instead your family perhaps values experiences, you'll probably plan for more travel than a family who's less active. So take some time to really reflect on what's important to you. And then to create a long-term vision of your financial future, for each of your goals, you're going to want to know a couple of things. One, time horizon. So when is this goal going to occur? How much does it cost today? And how does that cost grow and change over time? So what is the cost going to be when that goal comes around? And knowing these things will help you to determine the best approach to meeting those goals. So we're going to take some time to look at some examples. We all have different priorities, circumstances, and goals. Some of your goals may be deeply personal and unique to you, but there are other goals like emergency savings and retirement that everyone should have. And as you consider all of your goals competing for your hard-earned dollars, some people find it helpful to actually write them down, maybe even assign a picture to them so you can visualize it. That would be good for people who are visual. I know some people who have even created Pinterest boards for their goals. A new January activity now is creating a vision board. So all of these kind of get you excited about your goals and focused on your goals. In future sessions in this webinar series, we'll be focusing more intently on best practices for prioritizing those goals. But for now, what we're going to do is organize them by time horizon. So that's a convenient way to visualize how your life will change over time. So here are some examples of some common goals that we see. And one of the first things we do with clients is to make sure they have a sufficient emergency fund or rainy day fund. And we define that as enough savings to cover 3 to 6 months of living expenses as a safety net should something unexpected happen. And this money should be set aside in something really safe, like savings, checking, CDs, so you know it's going to be there if you need it. So definitely emergency fund is the first priority. And generally short-term goals have more clarity in terms of cost. If you're looking to buy a home, let's say in the next 6 months, you have information and data readily available to help you chart your course. You know what comparable houses are selling for. You know how much you've saved for a down payment. You might already be pre-qualified for a mortgage and you know what prevailing mortgage rates are. And information like this is really helpful to quantify the cost of that goal. Things get a little trickier as you head further out on the timeline, and we'll run through a simple case study to make that process for longer term goals a little more concrete. So here is a fictitious couple, Frank and Joanna Miller, in their late 40s. This is their second marriage for both of them. They have a 5-year-old daughter, Mary Beth. Frank works in finance. His annual salary is $300,000. Joanna makes $50,000 a year as a nurse. And they spend about $200,000 a year on regular living expenses, excluding taxes. And they're both contributing to their retirement plans. Now, last week, we reviewed a net worth statement in our part of getting organized and building a solid foundation, which is, it's really just a way to organize what you own on the left-hand side and what you owe on the right-hand side. And a quick look at the Miller's net worth statement tells us they have just enough in emergency savings. They have about 4.5 months of expenses in their cash account at Vanguard and their everyday checking. They have a mix of account types and assets. So they have one taxable investment account and a few retirement accounts. And their home equity represents about 1/3 of their net worth. Over on the liability side, we see they have a mortgage, and they've also just finished with some redecorating in their house and have a little more credit card debt than they would really like. So this is our starting point, and the Millers have shared their goals with us. And their very first goal is to pay off their credit card debt. They also would like to pay for a 4-year college for their daughter, Mary Beth. And they would like to retire at age 70. To achieve their short-term goal, as we said, we have more clarity in terms of accomplishing those short-term goals. They plan to take some money from their savings to start paying down the credit card debt. And then on top of that, they're going to dedicate an extra $6,000 from their regular cash flow this year to pay off the credit card. and they understand that they might have to cut back on some of their discretionary expenses to cover this, but this is such an important goal to them, they're willing to make that trade-off. But let's look at the time horizon and cost of their mid and long-term goals more closely, because this is a little more ambiguous. And we're going to start with their midterm goal of paying for college. Their daughter, Mary Beth, is a bright young lady, and Frank and Joanna want to plan to cover 100% of a 4-year college education. She's 5 today and will attend college from 2035 to 2038. So their time horizon for this goal is to the college start, or even you could even argue through college, through her years of college. So 13 to 17 years, let's say, that's their time horizon. And they already know that college has a hefty price tag. In today's dollars, many institutions run over $70,000 a year. And for this example, I'm using the cost of my alma mater, Hamilton College. And today, tuition, room, and board at Hamilton costs over $74,000 a year. So that's today. How do we estimate what college will cost when Mary Beth goes in 2035? So we need to figure out an inflation rate. What do we inflate this cost at? And cost for private college has been rising greater than other goods and services in our lives at an average rate of 4 to 5% per year historically. And so if we apply a 4% inflation rate, the annual cost is projected to be over $124,000 by the time Mary Beth is ready for college in 2035. And Frank and Joanna will need to be prepared to pay a total of $527,000 if they want to cover all 4 years at 100% of the cost. So in this process, we've identified the goal, we've determined the time horizon, and we've quantified the cost. So now we have to make a plan to get there. So far, the Millers have contributed $15,000 a year to a 529 account for Mary Beth. A 529 college savings plan is an investment account designated for education that grows tax deferred, and distributions for qualified education expenses are tax-free. So now they have a total of about $75,000 saved in this account, but they know they need to keep contributing. And for purposes of projecting, we're going to assume that that account earns 5% on average each year for 13 years. So the Millers have a couple of options for additional savings. They can continue on the path of contributing regularly, $15,000 a year, or about $1,300 a month. And this gets them really close to funding the full cost of college. Or if they had the resources to save in a lump sum today and then not contribute anything else, they could set aside a total of $181,000 today and still meet that goal of funding college 100%. So as a side note, if the Millers wanted to go with option number 2, they could take advantage of what's called super funding for a 529 account. 529 contributions are considered completed gifts to the beneficiary of the account, so to Mary Beth, and you're allowed to gift 5 years worth of annual contributions. So that's $16,000 per person or $32,000 per couple, all at once, and still fall within the annual gifting limits. And the tax law actually allows you to spread out that gift over 5 years. Now, you couldn't contribute anything more unless the annual gift exclusion goes up, but you wouldn't then be able to contribute anything more to that account for over 5 years. So if Frank and Joanna contributed up to $160,000 all in 1 year, they would still be eligible for that gift tax exclusion. If they elected to contribute the full $181,000, that extra $21,000 is applied against their lifetime gift and estate tax exclusion. Or perhaps they might consider saving that extra $20,000 in a different account, a joint account that they just earmark for education savings. But Frank and Joanna decide to continue to contribute $15,000 a year And that might sound like a lot for all of us. How can we dedicate an extra $15,000 per year above and beyond all of our other expenses? And the danger is that thinking about that amount might lead us to kick the can down the road. But what I wanted to show you is that by waiting and not allowing the return of a 529 investment do some heavy lifting for you, you'll actually have to contribute more later to make up the difference. The earlier you start, the less you have to save. And I'll just pause there to see if anybody has any questions. Carrie, have any questions come in?
Not yet, but if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box below, and we'll try to answer them for you.
Great. So the point is not to wait. Even small contributions, small amounts add up. Saving a little each month toward your goal can make a big difference. So this is a chart from JP Morgan Asset Management comparing 3 different investment plans over 3 different start dates. So the first investor contributes $100 a month. They're in the dark blue. The second investor contributes $250 a month in light blue. And the third in green contributes $500 a month. And as you can see, by starting early and being consistent, the more time your money has to compound and grow in value. For example, contributing $500 a month when a child is born results in almost $87,000 more by the time they reach college age than even waiting until age 6 to start that savings. So starting early and investing automatically each month really does help to maximize the power of compounding. And people find it really helpful to set up automatic investment plans from bank accounts. There are some employers that will also allow you to do this. And we find it's almost like contributing to your 401k. Once you start doing it long enough, you sometimes don't even miss it. So it's good to get on that regular schedule.
So Allison, I do have a question that came in, and the question is, can grandparents contribute to a 529 for a grandchild, and will that sort of limit the ability for Frank and Joanne Miller to contribute?
So each person has their own gift limit. So grandparents could also contribute to a 529 for a beneficiary. They could also open up a grandparent-owned 529 and contribute to that separately. And it would not limit what Joanna and Frank can contribute on their own. 529 some 529 plans set limits to how much you can contribute, but usually it's high enough that that you wouldn't be limited in terms of what it's often over $300,000, $400,000. Anything you would add to that, Carrie?
Nope, I think that covered it. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So now for a longer term goal like retirement, we want to apply a similar framework. Time horizon is not quite as discrete as with college, for example. We might know when we want to retire, but how do we know how long to plan for? And what's the cost? In this case, the cost is our living expenses. And how will those grow and change over time? And you also want to take inventory of your resources, your income, and your assets. So for time horizon, the one thing I can say is count on living a long time. Because if you don't, you might run short at the back end, and you don't want that. My colleague's 93-year-old father-in-law was a CPA. He saved diligently for retirement. He did everything right. And now he has to watch what he spends because in his words, I didn't think I'd live this long. So you definitely want to plan for a long life. And this chart that we're sharing now is also from JP Morgan Asset Management. And it shows the probability of a 65-year-old today, the probability that they'll reach certain ages, various ages. For example, a 65-year-old couple today, there's about a 50% chance that they'll live to age 90. And then you can see up on the upper right-hand side of the screen, you can see the averages historically, and that they're increasing over time as we become more healthy as a society. In our planning process, we use the 25% probability age based on actuarial tables or above average. So we're counting on our clients living well into their 90s. And some clients even want us to project longer to 100, 110 as kind of a worst case scenario. So when we talk about time horizon for retirement, that includes your years in retirement. And without a doubt, the time horizon will be long, potentially 30 plus years. So that's how we quantify time horizon for retirement. Now, how do we estimate the cost? Well, we know what we spend today. We also know that our spending might change over time. And this chart illustrates what households who are partially or fully retired spend on different categories at specific ages. And when we first retire, our spending is fairly similar to pre-retirement. And actually, just anecdotally, we often see that people actually spend more in their early years of retirement. We're still healthy, we remain active, we want to travel. So we often see this bump up in spending, which isn't reflected in this chart. And then as we age, spending may drop as we slow down, but we start to spend a lot more on housing and healthcare late in life. So it's likely that if you want to maintain your lifestyle in retirement, even if the components change, your overall spending level, excluding taxes, will be similar through retirement. So so a good starting point is using what your expenses are today. And then how do we inflate those going forward, right? Because inflation's been in the news a lot lately. Prices of so many goods and services have been rising faster than they have in recent history, but not all equally. So these four categories in this chart, housing, healthcare, food, transportation, comprise about 80% of spending for people ages 75 and up. So this is a good proxy for inflation experienced by older retirees. We see in this chart that last year housing costs rose 5%, food costs rose 6%, and interestingly, healthcare costs rose last year more slowly than on average from prior years. So inflation fluctuates from year to year, and for long-term projections, we should count on averages or trends, I would say. And you don't have to use the same inflation rate for every expense. In our planning process, we actually applied different inflation rates. For example, 3% for general living expenses. We use a higher inflation for medical costs, 6%, and a 5% inflation rate for long-term care expenses. So that's kind of how you piece together what sort of inflation we should count on in retirement. Any questions up to that point? No, we're good.
No, I mean, do you have any suggestions for how somebody who's just entered retirement might deal with the current inflationary environment that we're in?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think we're all feeling it. And one tactic is to postpone things that you don't have to do right now, right? Like buy a car. If you can put off buying a car, that's probably until next year or the year after, that's probably a good move. If you're pricing out travel too, for example, you might want to postpone or make compromises in terms of where you're going or when you're going.
And another question that came in is, can you go back to when you're talking about inflation with respect to healthcare costs? Is how do long-term care costs fit into that? I think you mentioned that there might be a different inflation rate you're using for that.
Yeah, so when we're doing a plan for a client, We do distinguish between long-term care costs and regular medical costs, because part of regular medical cost inflation has to do with not just market prices, but also your age. As you age, your medical costs just become more expensive. So we use a 6% inflation rate for medical costs. And then we follow a Genworth study to determine or to pinpoint inflation on long-term care. And that is changes by region. And for planning purposes in the Northeast, we use a 5% inflation rate.
So
Down south might be less expensive.
Another good question came in, which is, what's the likelihood based on historical averages that inflation is going to go back down over time from where it is today? And should we expect, that once our spending, particularly in years like this year, where we see the inflation affecting our spending, that our cost of living goes up and never goes back down with inflation?
Yeah, those are good questions. For a long time, we've been using an inflation rate for general expenses of 3%. And until, I would say, about 6 months ago, clients used to challenge us on that. Well, inflation is not 3%, it's 1%. It's really low. And our point of view was it's not always going to be low. So you sort of want to use that trend or average over the long term. I think in any one year it can fluctuate and will fluctuate. But for longer term projections, you do want to sort of settle in on an average. Anything you would add to that, Carrie?
No, that we would, I guess, you have to watch yourself. Like if you start spending more because of inflation in 2022, obviously you need to adjust your spending going forward as inflation comes back down. And that's a trap that a lot of people get stuck into, which is your spending increases for whatever reason, and you continue that track over time, over what
Exactly.
what your goal is.
Exactly. Right. So retirement really is a balancing act. You're balancing your needs versus your resources. We've discussed the needs on the left. So you've got your life expectancy, longevity. You understand your expenses. You've applied inflation rates. Your taxes are largely going to be driven by what resources you have in retirement. So what the components of your income are. And you're likely going to have at least one source of relatively fixed income, that's Social Security. You can check out what you're eligible for. If you haven't already, you can log on to ssa.gov and create a profile and see what the government expects you to collect in Social Security at your retirement age. You may have a pension, an employer pension, but those are becoming fewer and fewer. And more savings is going to be the biggest part of your resource in retirement. So the big question is, how much should you be saving? And the answer depends on some factors. Like it depends when you start, it depends how you're invested, and it depends if you have any other accumulated savings. But some ballpark guidelines are here. So if you start saving for retirement before the age of 30, you're going to want to target at least 10% per year savings, and that's of your gross income. If you don't start to save for retirement until between ages 30 and 40, you want to bump that up to 15% per year. And then by contrast, if you wait and you don't start saving until after 40, you're really going to have to increase that savings rate to between 20 and even up to 30, 40% of your earnings towards retirement. So in our case study, Frank and Joanna are saving 17% of their income each year for retirement. And this is not too far off the mark given their ages, but they'd be a little bit closer if Joanna could maximize her contributions to her 403B. And this year, the maximum to an employer retirement plan for somebody under 50 is $20,500. So the big message is the sooner you start saving, the better the chances are of you achieving your goals, and the less you're actually going to have to save towards your overall goal. And I love this chart. Again, JP Morgan Asset Management, they have some great educational slides that we love sharing with our clients. But this compares 4 different investors and 4 different retirement outcomes. And they all have different behaviors. So consistent Chloe in blue saves and invests consistently over time and reaches age 65 with more than double the amount of the other savers. Each of these savers is saving $200 per month, but at different times of their lives. Quitter Quincy in gray starts early, but stops after 10 years, just as late Lila in purple starts saving. So despite saving 1/3 as much as Lila, that power of long-term compounding on money invested early helps Quincy accumulate almost the same level of wealth at his retirement at age 65. So you're so much better off starting early and investing regularly. And then I love this one, Nervous Noah saves as much as and as often as Chloe. So he's socking it away, but keeps his savings in cash rather than investing it. So he's not making it work for him. And as a result, he accumulates about 1/3 of what Chloe accumulates over her investment horizon. So if you're still working, here's one way to check in to know where you stand with your retirement savings. This chart helps us to determine whether we're on the right track to be able to afford our current lifestyle over a 30-year retirement period. And if you're not on track, you want to consider developing a plan to get there. So the way you read this chart is go to the intersection of your current age and your closest current household income and multiply that multiple by your current income. So for example, if you're 40 years old and your household income is 200,000, you will want to have saved about $780,000 by now. And if you haven't, you know you need to get on track to do some catch up. Some of these charts are so helpful. I think what we'll do is try to send them out to the people attending so that you can digest them on your own. And certainly we always welcome questions as you, any follow-up questions as you reflect on our talk today. So just to recap, you want to use these steps to create a long-term vision for the basis of your financial plan. You want to visualize your goals. You want to identify the time horizon, understand the cost and how that cost will grow and change, make a plan to get there, and measure your progress. So am I where I thought I would be this time last year? And life isn't static. It's very normal for goals to change over time. So make sure you take the time to revisit them as your circumstances change.
Yeah, last point is a good one, Allison, in that even if you get behind on your savings goals, you can always sort of readjust and refocus and not you're not failing. You're just reevaluating.
Exactly. And not only is life not static, but life throws you curveballs, and you have to catch those curveballs, which might sort of make you veer off track for a little while, but then you sort of reassess and get back on track. Terrific. We can pause for more questions. If you haven't already signed up for the rest of the series, we'll be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the recording of this webinar, and also a link to sign up for the rest of the sessions if you'd like to.
And next week's session is on savings priorities and savings goals and priorities.
Right, we have 3 more sessions left: savings, opportunities, and priorities. investing, a short session on investing. And then the last one's going to be a lot of fun, healthy habits for your kids, healthy financial habits for your kids. All right, well, thank you all. Feel free to reach out with any questions. And we're so happy you joined us today. We hope you found the content valuable, and we look forward to seeing you next